Karibuni watazamaji wa ITV katika kipindi hiki maalum.
Welcome, dear viewers of ITV, to this special program focusing on the whole issue of conservation of forests in Mpanda district, Katavi region, where to a large extent increased human activities including farming, indiscriminate establishment of settlements around water sources have seriously affected sustainable conservation of the Katavi National Park and Katuma River, which is the lifeline of the park. The history of conservation of forests, water sources and wildlife in Tanzania can be traced as far back as under colonial rule. During this period, various traditional conservation methods were used to protect forests and water sources. After independence, the importance of conservation was given new vigor when the founder of the nation, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, sensitized on conservation by increasing protected areas allocated for wildlife, forests and water sources. The statement made by Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere in September 1961 at an International Environment Conservation Symposium in Arusha was significant in strengthening conservation in the country for the benefit of the people, nation and internationally.
Tunayo maeneo ya hifadhi ambayo yanahifadhiwa kisheria.
We have conservation areas, conserved and protected rules and regulations under the law, but which have now started to be relaxed. I believe the first thing which the government has to do, particularly through local government leaders, is to enforce decrees, regulations and rules governing conservation to ensure protected areas are preserved according to the law and whole convenes, and whoever contravenes the law must be accountable because the culprit makes a big sin and bad omen.
Atakayevunja sheria tupambane naye kwa sababu anatufanyia jambo la dhambi kabisa, jambo baya.
Poor enforcement of conservation legislation in the country has contributed to destruction of natural resources including wildlife, water sources and forests. Mpanda district in Katavi region is among areas in the country before and after independence that were endowed with forests essential for survival of water sources. However, that has now changed because due to increased populations and illegal activities, the forests have been affected by massive environmental destruction. Climate change and environmental destruction have contributed to drying up of the Katuma River, which is not only depended on by communities living nearby, but it is also important for the survival of wildlife species in the area, such as crocodiles, hippos and fish. Despite the environmental challenges facing River Katuma, little research has been done by environmentalists on the situation. This special report by ITV might be the first in-depth study to challenge environmental conservation institutions and various stakeholders to increase efforts in saving River Katuma from drying up. River Katuma has been drying up every year during dry season since 2000. Elisa Manasseh, an ecologist from Katavi National Park, says drying up of the river has had consequences on water species including crocodiles, hippos and fish. With River Katuma drying during drought, crocodiles have been living under shades of trees and in caves or holes dug near the river. This is indeed an unusual sight to see in the lives of crocodiles. Here, the crocodiles can be seen fighting to get into the holes, seeking the coolness inside, and only the strongest make it into the hole. During this period, crocodiles can stay for 4 months without eating, as they have no strength to hunt for food without the water of the river. Ecologist Elisa Manasseh says the situation is even worse for fish species which die when the river dries up or when the water becomes hot only to become food to scavenger birds.
In Katavi National Park, amphibians are seriously affected, particularly during the dry season. These include crocodiles, which are forced to make pit holes for survival, while fish such as catfish and mudfish could be found crammed in single places. Hippos can also be found desperately searching for water. One day I witnessed helpless fish species on a dry riverbed as there was no water. In such horrible situations, their survival remains at stake and marines cannot breed.
The head of the security department at the Katavi National Park, Davis Mushi, said drying up of Katuma River has had social and economic consequences and forced wild animals to go into the villages in search of water, resulting in conflicts and sometimes even deaths of people. He says drying up of Katuma River has caused groups of hippos to live in mud, where you can find between 700 to 800 hippos squeezed in one area, breaking out into frequent fights of survival, which sometimes result in deaths.
The danger which also affects Katavi National Park wildlife at large is when the river becomes dry. Animals are forced to leave their habitats and sometimes migrate outside the national park in search for water in other places where they find little water, which is not enough. For all, scrambling ensues, leading to some animals being killed. In a territory where many animals live, each pool is within its family group. Now, when various animal families are forced to integrate, skirmishes and fighting can occur, particularly between bulls, during which some animals can be killed or injured. When the river is dry in some places, such as Iku, you will find crocodiles under trees or in caves where, for lack of prey, they die as they cannot survive without eating for more than 2 months. These animals living in water catch their prey when they go to drink water of the river. As park guards or game rangers, our task becomes difficult when wildlife migrate outside the park habitats. Outside the park, it becomes easier for poachers to hunt the animals, some of which go to villages to find water. Wildlife migrating to park borders, villages, can also cause disputes, destroy crops, and kill people.
The park warden of Katavi National Park, Ignas Gara, says environmental destruction at water sources is a hindrance to sustainable conservation of the national park started in 1974, being amongst the biggest in the country and a significant economic contributor to tourism.
Katuma River originates from areas of Bungwe Mountains along Road Kigoma and Mishamo areas, where currently water sources have severely been devastated, leading the river to dry before rain season. The effects have included deaths of a wide range of animal species living in water, such as hippos, crocodiles and fish. For example, many hippos and crocodiles died 2 or 3 years ago due to prolonged drought. What we want to be done is for all river stakeholders to cooperate to preserve its water sources. We need to have Katuma River Board to safeguard its water sources. We cannot rule out for the water to be used for other activities, but we want sustainable water access for Katavi National Park wildlife.
The head of the tourism department, Constancia Mafa, said the park has been implementing a general management program which has contributed to the increase of the numbers of tourists and the national income every year.
The number of tourists visiting Katavi National Park is on the increase due to joint efforts in tourism promotion by the government and Tanzania National Parks Authority. As you can see, the state of the ferries is terrible and they do not meet the required standards. I would just like to caution my fellow Tanzanians and others to take more efforts in refraining from activities which can destroy water sources, living in their natural habitation for a long time without being disturbed, as can now be witnessed, whereby some of the animals have been dying due to lack of water. We should also note that tourism has to be safeguarded by Tanzanians themselves and not by people from outside. Hence the need to enhance conservation of our natural resources, including forests and wildlife.
Tanzania National Parks Authority, TANAPA, has started a program to dig up dams to conserve water, particularly during drought seasons for wildlife and water species. The Director General of Tanzania National Parks Authority, Alan Kijazi, explains more on the program.
Kuna umuhimu mkubwa sasa hivi tukaanza kuchimba mabwawa.
As Tanzania National Parks Authority TANAPA, we have noticed that there is need for now to start constructing dams for rainwater harvest. Since most water sources of Katuma River were being destroyed, our main objective is to now ensure that during dry seasons we have enough water for the park to meet demand of wildlife in the respective habitats. Target places for the dams will be areas which will not be affected by the park's ecological system, but to enhance its vegetation.
Kwenda kwenye mito iliyoko hifadhini yanakuwa ni machache mno.
Kwa karibu miaka 15 sasa, mto Katuma umekuwa ukikauka kila mwaka.
Katuma River has been drying up during the months of August to December. But during the rainy season, when the river floods, it becomes impossible to believe that it ever dries up. This is how the river looked like in June, when this special report team began its research, with many areas such as Lake Katavi and Lake Chada were full of water.
Na ziwa Chada yalikuwa na maji mengi.
Despite having large numbers of wildlife species such as giraffe, wildebeest and antelope, Katavi National Park also has the biggest numbers of hippos than any other national park in the country. This national park is also home to more than 400 migrating and non-migrating birds and other species. The issue of environmental destruction of water sources, causing them to dry up, is a national problem and has led authorities in Katavi region to announce an operation to evict illegal invaders at water sources, particularly on Bugwe Mountain. Katavi Regional Commissioner Dr. Rajabu Rutengwe says these measures have included the removal of Bugwe village.
River and other water sources which provide water to Katavi National Park should be spared, because the park's welfare will depend on water sources which should not be destroyed. Therefore, we have devised a strategic plan to ensure all areas of Katuma River water sources are safeguarded by preventing human activities which contribute to destruction of environment.
Mpanda District Commissioner Paza Mwamlima is keen to see water sources and forests in the district are conserved, and in many meetings with various stakeholders has directed experts to have in place programs which ensure people live and carry out development activities in legal areas only.
To maintain survival of Katavi National Park, Mpanda district authorities must enforce land use planning to ensure there was land for farmers, livestock keepers and forests. The overall objective should be to save the district's environment by allocating areas for farming, pastures and protected forests.
Elekezo la taifa kuokoa vyanzo vya maji, kuokoa misitu.
Hata hivyo, pamoja na juhudi za serikali katika utoaji wa elimu kwa wananchi.
However, despite government efforts in educating people on the importance of environmental conservation, there is still the challenge of illegal immigrants who, after entering Mpanda district, have set up squatters in the forest, take their livestock to graze near water sources and cut trees for charcoal. Many of the forests have been destroyed by tree felling, not just for making charcoal, but also to clear areas for farming. The Director of Conservation from the Jane Goodall Institute, Emmanuel Mtiti, says the organization has been involved in educating people on the importance of environmental conservation in villages of Mpanda district and sees the need for society to make environmental conservation a national agenda.
It should be noted that as long as the environment continues to be destroyed, the whole ecological system of Katavi National Park will also be affected. The concept that any Tanzanian can go and live anywhere in the country must be guided by laid down procedures, not at the sake of one's will and risk to the environment. There have to be laid down plans for settlement, farming, livestock and conservation areas.
Tunaathiri mfumo wa ekolojia mpana zaidi. Naye mtaalamu wa hifadhi kutoka
Goodlove Mwamsojo, an environmentalist from Lake Tanganyika Basin Conservation Project, says drying up of Katuma River, whose source is from the forest, should not be ignored, as the water from the river is not only important for the conservation of Katavi National Park, but also for communities and Lake Rukwa, which has started to be affected by environmental degradation, despite being depended on by the residents of Mbeya, Rukwa and Katavi regions for fishing and income-generating activities. He says environmental effects faced by wildlife such as crocodiles and hippos at Katavi National Park is a clear indication of rapid depletion of water sources.
Katuma River flows through Katavi National Park to Lake Rukwa, which has many crocodiles than all other places and lakes in Tanzania. And lack of water during dry season should not only be a concern of the park, but even for human and domestic consumption. Therefore, what is needed is to devise plans and organize the arrangements to ensure water sources for the river are protected at any cost to avoid effect of lack of water for both wildlife and people.
Magnus Mosha,
an environmentalist from Frankfurt Zoological Society, says Mpanda district, which is endowed with forests, which are water sources of rivers, should become a conservation area.
Katika uhifadhi na kusisitiza umuhimu wa kuwepo kwa mipango ya matumizi bora ya ardhi. Swala la matumizi bora ya ardhi ndio swala la msingi.
In the whole issue of conservation, land use planning must be the key element in tackling problems related to environment destruction across the country, including Katavi National Park. Better use of land by people can preserve nature and vegetation and avoid human activities, including farming and establishment of settlements around water sources. For preservation of natural resources, it is high time land use planning is adopted to have special areas for farming, pastures for livestock, keepers and settlements.
In recognition of the importance of forests in Mpanda district in conservation nationally and internationally, the Nature Conservancy has been in the forefront in sensitizing society in participating in the protection of forests. The coordinator of Tuungane project, Petro Masolwa, says educating society on environmental conservation of Katuma River and its sources is a prerequisite, as if allowed to continue, environmental degradation will have major consequences on society, as the drying up of the river is an indication of other rivers drying up in the near future.
Katuma is a great river, and if you see such a great river drying, it is an indication that its tributaries or water sources have also started to disappear. Katuma River is the lifeline for Katavi National Park. It must be noted that its survival is threatened mainly by migrants, including pastoralists from neighboring regions. Therefore, we have started to work with stakeholders from neighboring regions to ensure conservation of the river. This includes establishment of committees of experts to undertake the task of conservation, funded by a non-governmental organization, the Nature Conservancy.
Conservation stakeholders and the government have partnered to start a Katuma River Water User Association to educate communities on better use of the river in order to prevent it from drying up. However, members of the association face many conservation and security challenges of River Katuma, caused by unplanned irrigation schemes and closing up the river. These illegal activities have prevented Katuma River from flowing throughout the year to Katavi National Park and subsequently to Lake Rukwa.
Polluters of Katuma River include livestock keepers and other people living along the river. These people fell trees indiscriminately, particularly farmers who want land for farming, as well as misuse of traditional irrigation scheme which cause siltation. Therefore, we have started to mobilize and educate people to undertake human activities about 60 meters from the rivers, as stipulated under the law governing safety of rivers and oceans. Pollution of the river has also affected fishermen and other stakeholders. This is why deliberate efforts are needed to protect the river and its water sources for the benefit of both Katavi National Park and other people.
As part of mobilization to protect Katuma River, seminars have been organized for members of relevant groups to educate people on protection as well as conservation of the river. Target groups include livestock keepers, farmers, and fishermen. Stakeholders now want the campaign to be sustainable. According to stakeholders, before 2000, Katuma River had never dried up, but the situation has changed and become worse with the influx of people from neighboring regions who enter Mpanda district.
Pastoralists and illegal invaders living in the forest say that local residents had sold them land without knowing that the land was under forest reserve and that it was prohibited to set up settlements, farming and livestock keeping.
On our arrival in Gulamata village, we found members of Bende tribe who had lived there for more than 40 years. We, members of Sukuma tribe, followed all the necessary procedures we were required to follow, including paying 35,000 shillings to the village government through the tent cell leaders who showed us land for farms. We migrated from Shinyanga because we were crowded and clan land was no longer enough to sustain interest of all family members. For example, each family member was offered only 2 acres, while our tradition is to have land tracts of between 20 and 25 acres for farming. This is why we were forced to fell trees so that we can have big farms which we use to plow to cultivate them.
Illegal invaders entering forest reserves in Mpanda district say that where they come from, there is no land for grazing, without realizing that they are the cause of environmental degradation because of their nomadic lifestyle.
The government is telling us about better life for each Tanzanian and that anybody can live anywhere in the country provided he or she does not breach law of the land. But here we are now being harassed and evacuated on claims that we have invaded the park. We are puzzled that our current parks across the country are not enough. That is why we are being forced to leave this place where we're struggling to eradicate poverty. I come from Igusule in Shinyanga region. I left my home village because of weather, which has denied our crops because of erratic rains and prolonged drought. We could not survive there because we have no other alternative work apart from farming. We come to Rukwa region for farming because the region has fertile land due to its vegetation of forests, many rivers, waterfalls and mountains compared to the deserts now facing Shinyanga region.
The nomadic habits have not only caused negative environmental effects to water sources, but to the herds of animals as well, which are forced to walk long distances to look for grazing grounds. This causes them to become weak and thin, affecting the selling price, as the cost is likely to be less when sold than that of healthier-looking livestock. Residents of Bugwe village, who have been directed to move to pave way for sustainable conservation of the environment and water sources, want the government to first evict the illegal invaders living on Bugwe mountain, on claims that they are the cause of environmental degradation.
We are asking state organs to help us eliminate criminals who have invaded water sources of Katuma River. Twice we went there to remove them, but we were chased with clubs and other traditional arms, and since we are not warlords, we decided to flee, and thanks God we escaped.
Ripoti Maalum imebaini kuwa
This special report has discovered that despite causing environmental destruction, the illegal invaders have been living far from social services, forcing school-going aged children, as many as 20,000, to miss out on primary and secondary school education.
wazazi na watoto wenyewe.
Nimetokea katika maeneo ya Mwanza.
I came from Mwamboku village in Msungu district, Mwanza region. My first stop was Tabora, where I attended primary school to standard 4, but I did not sit for the standard 4 national examinations, as we had to move where we are now. Since then, we have been living here in the forest where there is no school.
Tuko huko mapolini, hakuna shule.
We want you to build a school where we can study as we have never gone to school.
Aidha, kutokana na kuishi mbali na
Long distances from health services has made many people who become ill dependent on traditional medicine made by traditional healers living in the forests.
There is no health facility here. That is why we go to traditional healers. I have come here to be treated chest, stomach, and other diseases, and through herbs to remove bad omens related to superstition.
Destruction of environment and water sources in Mpanda district has caused the water depth of Lake Rukwa to continue to decrease annually. Residents of Muze ward who depend on the lake for fishing want the government to start seasonal fishing to prevent illegal fishing and to allow the number of fish species to increase.
As fishermen, we suggest the lake be closed for at least 3 to 6 months, like other lakes where illegal fishing or human activities led to their closure. Where we are now standing were areas for fish breeding, but there is no water now, and lakeshore grasses where fish breeded were now being devoured by cattle. A fisherman used to go to the lake at dawn and return after 11 hours in the morning with 4,000 fish fetching him 400,000 shillings. But now the fisherman catches only 100 fish and sells 30 fish for only 1,000 shillings. The amount is too little for any development, let alone school fees for children. I ask the government to review the whole issue of raising public awareness on environment. Rampant illegal fishing in Lake Rukwa includes the use of drift fish nets, which, with my experience in Lake Tanganyika, destroy fish breeding grounds. If not checked, drift fishing nets will seriously affect fishing in Lake Rukwa, as now availability of fish from the lake has started to dwindle.
Environmental officers from Mpanda District Council in Katavi region say destruction of forests is massive, and it is estimated 20,000 hectares of forest land has been destroyed by illegal settlements, livestock and shift farming. Environmental officers from Mpanda District Council in Katavi region say destruction of forests is massive, and it is estimated 20,000 hectares of forest land has been destroyed by illegal settlements, livestock and shift farming. Josephine Rupia, a land, natural resource and environment officer, and Lucas Nyambala, a forester from Mpanda District Council, says efforts to remove illegal villages in forests and near water sources are sustainable.
An influx of migrants who have been entering Rukwa region from other areas of the country without following laid-down procedures has been the underlying cause of environment degradation in the region. The problem has mostly affected Katuma River, the lifeline of Katavi National Park, destruction of many areas of the park, Bugwe village corridor and other areas where the river crosses has worsened the environment situation for the wildlife.
To minimize the situation, it was high time on behalf of Tanzanians for relevant authorities from district level to review the task of tackling environment degradation and destruction of water sources of Katuma River. For the interest of the nation and all Tanzanians at large, each individual, particularly in Mpanda district, has a contribution to offer to resolve the problem. This is in addition to contribution of other stakeholders of Katavi National Park, environment and conservation at large.
Herds of livestock in Muze ward near the shores of Lake Rukwa have increased from 2,200 cattle to 15,000 who drink from Lake Rukwa, causing the number of fish species to decrease. Reports from Lake Rukwa Water Basin Office in Sumbawanga, Rukwa region, admits that reduction of water levels from Lake Rukwa is caused by increased livestock at the lake and environmental degradation at water sources, with statistics showing that the number of fish has dropped from more than 5,000 tons in the past few years to the current 130 tons per year. This was a special report on environmental degradation in Mpanda district, Katavi region, and increased human activities affecting Katuma River, which flows to Lake Rukwa through various villages in Mpanda district and Katavi National Park.
Hifadhi ya Taifa ya Katavi na baadaye kumwaga maji yake katika ziwa Rukwa.
ITV Daima, super brand nambari 1 Tanzania.
Kwa maoni na ushauri tuandikie kupitia info@itv.co.tz.